Hello everyone and welcome back. 안녕하세요. 반갑습니다. This is Ji-won and you're listening to Understanding Korea one story at a time, where we talk about Korean history, culture, and the very specific ways they quietly shape our everyday lives. Last week, we talked about Distance Zero, the Korean caregiving instinct that closes the space between a sick child and the people who love them. The hands, the warmth, the staying close. Today, I want to talk about the other side of that closeness, the mental weight. Because here is the question that kept following me. Why does wait and see feel so hard for Korean parents? Why can it feel not just impractical, but almost morally wrong? To unpack that, I'm going to lean on a Korean book that has never been translated into English. The Sociology of Marriage and Childcare by 오찬호. 결혼과 육아의 사회학. And I will tell you upfront, this book does something I really appreciate. It refuses to blame individual mothers for being too intense. It asks what kind of system makes intensity feel like the only safe option. This book is about contemporary parents. But before we get into that, I want to start with the history, because Koreans didn't become too much in a vacuum. For centuries, life on the Korean peninsula was basically a survival game set on hard mode. Mountains everywhere, winters that are famous for a reason, summers that feel like living inside someone's mouth. In that world, the home became the clinic and caregivers became the first responders. There was no 24-hour pediatric urgent care. There were your grandmother's hands, the herbal teas, the home remedies, and folk cures we now lump together as traditional home treatments, 민간요법. These one quirky cultural details, they were the healthcare system. Then layer on a history of invasion and war. When institutions and borders cannot be trusted, you learn to trust the density of family, neighbors, village. You survive by staying close and staying alert. So yes, Korean caregiving has always had a bit of a too much quality. But in that older map, the risks were physical and immediate. Illness, cold, hunger, distance. Here's the twist. Today, the tigers are gone. The pharmacies are open, and Korea has world-class hospitals. So why does the anxiety feel worse? Because Korea didn't just modernize. It compressed modernity. In just a few decades, the main question shifted from, will we make it through winter, to, will my child end up on the right side of a brutally unequal job market? The survival instinct didn't disappear. It changed outfits. The new tiger is not outside your house. The new tiger is a sentence that sounds like this. If you don't invest now, your child might fall behind later. And once fear changes shape, care changes shape too. You don't sprint up a mountain to the clinic anymore. You sprint through information, forums, comparison charts, and KakaoTalk group charts. Your parenting brain becomes a browser with 47 open tabs, and somehow none of them is labeled rest. One of 오찬호's most helpful moves is to take this thing we call maternal love and ask, are we talking about emotion or are we talking about a moral contract disguised as emotion. In English, maternal love sounds warm, soft, slightly pastel. But in Korean, the common word for maternal love is mo-seong-ae, and it often behaves like something heavier than affection. It's love, yes, but it also quietly carries duty, sacrifice, and a moral standard you can fail. It can sound less like I love my child and more like I'm now personally responsible for the universe. And once something is framed as natural, it becomes almost impossible to argue with. Once something is framed as sacred, the person doing, it stops being treated like a person. Ochano's point is that motherhood is not just a role. It becomes a moral identity, and moral identities come with policing. Not always loud policing. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just the air. One of the lines that stuck with me in Ochano's parenting chapters is his insistence that childcare is not only labor, it is evaluation. A lot of mothers are not just raising children, they are being graded as human beings through childcare. And once you realize that, a lot of behaviors suddenly make sense. Why you cannot rest. Why you feel guilty when you're not actively doing something. Why you can have a perfectly fine day and then still feel uneasy at night because you didn't optimize it. It's like living inside a permanent performance review, except your manager is other parents, your mother-in-law, Instagram, the pediatric growth chart, and the invisible voice in your head that says, a good mom would have known better. And Korean vocabulary reflects this. Do you know the phrase 엄마표, meaning mom-made? Mom-made English, mom-made reading, mom-made emotional coaching, mom-made everything. Even the label itself is doing something sneaky. It builds mom into the product. So the mother is not only the caregiver, she is also the brand. And when a society tells you good motherhood equals endless improvement, mothers start living like they are never allowed to stop training. Which connects to a darker pattern Ochano describes. When mothers try to speak honestly about how hard parenting is, the response is often not empathy. It's a comparison. It gets harder. I had it worse. I did it, so why can't you? Pain becomes competitive. And in that atmosphere, rest starts to feel like a failure. Ochano is not saying that parents are irrational. He's saying the system is very persuasive, especially when fear shows up wearing the costume of expertise. This is where the baby expo becomes important. If you did not read my Substack post this week, a Korean Baby Expo is basically a birth and child care fair, 출산 육아 박람회. The literal translation is boring. The actual experience is not. Picture a giant convention hall with hundreds of booths. You can see almost every kind of baby product on the market in one go. Free samples. Today only discounts. Ochano describes it as part sleek trade show, part traditional market, just fully air-conditioned, and part science museum where every exhibit wants your email address and your soul. Parents go for very practical reasons, to compare brands, get discounts, pick up free samples, and learn what's new. But psychologically, the expo functions as a crash course in anxiety. The sales script is not, this is a nice product. It is, this is a shield against the risk you didn't know you should be terrified of. You hear asthma, fine dust, immune system, critical development window, brain stimulation, and each product steps in as the solution. The emotional flow which Ochano lays out goes something like introduce a scary risk, suggest the risk is urgent and may be irreversible, present the product as prevention, make hesitation feel like negligence. Parents don't live thinking, I'm shallow and love luxury strollers. They live thinking, I had no idea there were this many ways to fail my child before age 2. And then class shows up. In the book, Ochano talks about how seeing extremely high spenders actually makes mid-level spenders feel modest and rational. You walk in thinking, I'm not going to spend much. You see the parents buying $3,500 strollers. Suddenly, your $500 choice feels humble, even restrained. You become the reasonable parent, not because you're not spending, but because you're spending less than the outliers. It's a brilliant psychological trick. The Expo doesn't just get you to buy. It trains you to believe your buying is disciplined, data-driven, and morally justified. Now, a phrase I used in my Substack, which is not in Ochano's book, but feels like it could be. Parenting depends on gear. 육아는 템빨이다. You'll hear this all over the Korean parenting forums. It's usually half joke, half confession. On the surface, it's funny. Underneath, it says, maybe I can compensate for my limits as a parent with the right equipment. If the baby doesn't sleep, parents ask, is this a swaddle problem? A white noise machine problem? Did I buy the wrong bassinet? If the child is clingy, parents wonder if they need a specific carrier. If the baby is behind, the default solution is your shopping list. In a world where failure in motherhood feels morally charged, upgrades become duty. You are not treating yourself. You're protecting your child from potential regret. Future you is watching. So we now have two parallel grammars of care. Touch-based care, which says you are not alone. Gear-based care, which whispers a good parent should have been ready. Both are real, both are physical, but one holds vulnerability. The other tries to control that vulnerability. Ochano is very clear. This logic does not retire when your child ages out of diapers. It just changes shape. Once you accept that your child's future can be purchased in the form of preventative investment, the slope gets slippery. Parents compare upward. Compared to elite English kindergarten families, my spending is normal. Compared to parents with 5 programs, my 2 are minimal. Compared to the extreme examples in Gangnam Daechidong, I'm practically living off the grid. Fear of falling behind makes overinvestment feel reasonable. Overinvestment becomes the norm. The norm becomes the new moral minimum. And then we arrive at one of the most Korean sentences I know. Our child is not doing anything, so I'm worried. Anything, meaning they go to school, plus math tutoring, an English after-school academy, Korean reading and writing, piano, and maybe swimming and taekwondo. In many parts of the world, that is busy. In certain Korean zip codes, that is nothing. So back to our question. Why can't Korean parents just wait and see? After sitting with Ochano's book, my answer feels less psychological and more structural. Korean parents often cannot wait and see because waiting feels like gambling with your child's future. The penalty for losing is harsh. The safety net is thin. And the blame, when things go badly, is deeply personal and often gendered. You're not just waiting. You're risking judgment, risking falling behind, risking becoming the example other parents use in their late night conversations. We don't want to end up like them. In that context, action starts to feel compulsory, even when it's exhausting, even when it's expensive, even when it slowly eats away at your sense of self. Ochano is very honest about himself here. He says, I'm not a monk living outside the system. I open my wallet too. I know what happens if my kid misses out on certain things. I know what happens if we resist the norms too hard. So I adopt. And then I go home and write about how horrible it all is. That to me is the most Korean sentence in the whole book. Last week, I talked about how my hands move automatically when my child is sick. This week, I can see the other side more clearly. How an entire system trains parents to believe that if your hands ever stop moving, you're failing. So here are 3 questions I want to leave with, especially if you are parenting between cultures. What parts of your caregiving are love? What parts are panic? What parts were never fully your choice? If you can identify the difference, even a little, you might find a place to rest. Not because you care less, but because you are no longer letting the system burn your love as fuel. 오늘도 들어주셔서 감사합니다. 다음 주에 만나요. Bye!